You're bringing the leaders of the world's 7 most advanced economies to the same table. These are seasoned statesmen, people who have spent decades managing diplomatic crises. And these people are starting to leak information through their sources following a phone call. Why? Because what they heard didn't just worry them, it terrified them. The G7 leaders' decision to share Trump's statements with the public is an extremely unusual step by diplomatic standards. Such information typically remains behind closed doors, discussed in private. But this time was different. This time someone pulled the fire alarm, and it wasn't a quiet, subtle alarm. It was the kind that fills the entire hallway, deafening to the ears. So what triggered this alarm? Trump claimed that Iran was on the verge of surrender. He didn't stop there. He asserted that there was no longer an authorized leader in Tehran capable of declaring such a surrender. No one knows who it is, he said. Think about that. The commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful military, in the midst of an active military operation, is telling his allies something like this. At this point, we need to pause and take a step back, because Trump lying is no longer news in and of itself. Everyone knows this. The G7 leaders know it too. But the real question is, what was different this time? During his first term, Trump was constantly exaggerating, twisting, and distorting the truth. He was bluffing in trade negotiations, making up numbers, and declaring victories. These were calculated lies, strategic distortions. People got used to them at a certain point. They even started expecting them. But the content of the information leaked by G7 leaders this time points to something entirely different. Because Trump wasn't just exaggerating. He was speaking within a narrative he'd constructed in his own mind, one with no connection to reality. Iran was not on the verge of surrender. There were leaders in Tehran capable of making decisions. Both of these were easily verifiable facts. But Trump was saying the exact opposite and seemed to genuinely believe it. This difference changes everything. Someone who tells strategic lies at least sees reality and calculates accordingly. But if they cannot see reality, the ability to calculate disappears. So why is this so critical right now? We need to put the context into perspective. The Trump administration launched a military operation against Iran at the urging of 2 real estate executives. Not military strategists, but real estate executives. And this decision set off a chain reaction in one of the world's most sensitive regions. Iran has effectively blocked the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is a choke point through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply flows. A single country's control over the strait directly impacts global energy markets. And this has shaken the already fragile global economy. That's why G7 leaders had gathered. They had just one question: when will this end? If you're wondering about the answer to that question, here's what Trump said: Iran is on the verge of surrender, but there's no one to declare it. This answer doesn't address the question. On the contrary, it renders the question completely meaningless. Because if there's no leader and no one to surrender, when and how will this war end? Did Trump have an answer to that question? Apparently not. A former White House official spoke on MSNBC recently. And what he said aligns with what G7 leaders have leaked with striking clarity. The official was asked, "This situation can't be as chaotic as it seems, can it? I must be missing something." The answer was, no, it's not as bad as it looks. It's much worse. Pause for a moment. This is coming from someone who actually worked in the Trump administration. He continued. Trump and the people around him tend to present their lack of planning as if they were playing 4-dimensional chess. But it's not chess. It's not even checkers. It's like flipping a coin and seeing if it lands on heads or tails. And this isn't just sarcasm. The official gave a concrete example from the first term of the North Korea crisis. At the time, Trump's tough rhetoric was presented as a deliberate strategy. But what was the cabinet thinking? Cabinet members feared that Trump might accidentally trigger a nuclear war. So much so that Department of Homeland Security had actually drawn up plans for a nuclear war. What would we do if the commander-in-chief were to accidentally drag us into a nuclear conflict? Now let's turn to the issue of Iran. Trump's own special envoy said that Iran possesses enough fissile material to potentially produce 11 nuclear weapons. Their enrichment capabilities may not be sufficient for a full-fledged nuclear warhead. But the same envoy also said on CNBC 2 days ago this material could be used to make a dirty bomb. A dirty bomb. A weapon containing radioactive material designed to spread radiation rather than cause an explosion, something capable of rendering cities uninhabitable for years. And Trump went to war with this country, not by accident, by decision. But how was that decision made? Who was consulted? What did the military assessment say? None of this was shared with the public. A former official rightly asks, they aren't even looking 3 steps ahead. This isn't chess. It isn't even checkers. It's a coin toss. And in a conflict where a country's nuclear capabilities are at stake, A coin toss is not an acceptable method of decision-making under no circumstances ever. So the question that comes to mind at this point is, what does the Constitution say about such situations? The 25th Amendment in the U.S. exists precisely for this kind of scenario. It grants the cabinet the authority to remove a president who is unable to perform their duties or is making dangerous decisions, in theory. In practice, the situation is very different. On social media, the question, "Why isn't the 25th Amendment being invoked?" is asked frequently. One user's response was perhaps the sentence that best sums up the situation. The entire cabinet is walking around in shoes that don't fit. They're afraid to take them off. Consider this metaphor. Everyone is uncomfortable. Everyone knows there's a problem, but no one is taking off the shoes because they don't know what will happen. Because the cost of standing up to Trump seems heavier than the cost of staying in office. Is this a matter of courage? Yes, partly, but it's also a systemic issue. If institutions aren't strong enough to handle such extreme situations, individual courage isn't enough. And it appears that right now the institutions are struggling. At this point, we need to step back and look at the bigger picture. The G7 leaders' leak is an extremely rare step historically. Each of these leaders is grappling with public pressure, opposition parties, and election cycles in their own countries. There is a cost for them as well in publicly cornering Trump, yet they leaked it. Why is this significant? Because it indicates not mere concern, but panic. When diplomats are concerned, they quietly use back channels. When they panic, they leak information to the outside. They sound the fire alarm. And this alarm has been sounded simultaneously from multiple countries and multiple sources. This is not a coordinated criticism. It is the outward expression of a situation where everyone sees the same thing and reaches the same conclusion. So what do these leaders want? They likely want to send a message to the world. We see it too. We're worried too. We're not staying silent. But what this message can actually change in practice is a separate and far more complex question. The importance of the Strait of Hormuz is not just economic, but also geopolitical. Control over this narrow strait directly affects the balance of power in the region. A large portion of the oil from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Iraq passes through this strait. When Iran blocks this strait, it exerts pressure not only on Western countries, but also on Gulf nations. And this pressure is reflected in energy prices, inflation, and supply chains. With the global economy still not fully recovered from the pandemic and years of war, such a shock could have serious consequences. The energy crisis in Europe had already heightened political fragilities. In this process, a new energy shock could also shake the domestic politics of several countries. And at the center of all this lies the following question: can Trump see this picture? Or is the picture described by G7 leaders accurate? That is Trump living within a scenario he has constructed in his own mind, a scenario detached from reality? The answer to this question will determine the world's trajectory in the coming weeks. Looking at possible outcomes, the situation could unfold in several different directions. First scenario, Trump's advisors managed to bring him to the table, negotiation channels open, and a way out is found. This is the best case scenario, but given the current situation, how likely is it to happen? Second scenario, military operations continue to escalate. The likelihood of Iran deploying its nuclear capabilities grows, and the region becomes completely unstable. This is the scenario no one wants to mention, but must take into account. Third scenario, the U.S. Congress steps in, judicial oversight strengthens, or international pressure becomes sufficiently overwhelming and Trump takes a step back. This is also possible, but given Trump's track record so far, it's unclear how he'll react to the pressure. None of the scenarios are clean. None offer easy solutions. And this explains why G7 leaders are sounding the alarm, because predicting which scenario will unfold is becoming increasingly difficult. What are people who know this doing? G7 leaders are leaking information. Former White House officials are appearing on TV and saying it's much worse. Analysts are sounding the alarm. But is all this enough? History has taught us this. No matter how strong institutions and warning systems may be, they can remain ineffective without political will. And that is exactly what is missing right now. There are no courageous cabinet members on the inside. There is no effective deterrent pressure from the outside. Moreover, Trump is someone who tends to perceive any criticism as a personal attack and respond with even harsher measures. How can this vicious cycle be broken? No one knows the definitive answer. Perhaps the real question is this: if a fire alarm goes off and everyone around you hears it but no one runs to the door, what good is that alarm? It's a question without an answer. But we must not stop asking it, because stopping asking it means choosing not to hear the alarm. And that is a luxury no one can afford.